All right, good evening, everybody, and welcome to Inside Vaping, your weekly resource for vaping news. Actually, bi-weekly now. I'm not paying attention to our actual intro piece here. Our show airs live bi-weekly every other Tuesday night, starting at 10 p.m. EST via YouTube live event at theompage.com/live. And with that being said, I have an empty tank. Of course, we are late, so we're off to a great start here. But we do have a very special guest this evening. Dane, first of all, I'm going to turn it over to you here, and maybe you can introduce our guest. Of course, Jerry is with us as well.
Excellent. Thank you, gentlemen. It is good to be back in the co-hosting seat here after a brief absence. I am very happy to be back on the bike. Our guest tonight is Jeff Stier. He's a senior fellow at the National Center for Public Policy Research in Washington, D.C., who also heads its Risk Analysis Division. Mr. Stier attended the SPADA conference in Chicago last week and is joining us tonight to share his impressions of the event as well as discuss Mitch Zeller's appearance there. Jeff, welcome to the show, and thank you very much for taking time out of your very busy schedule to join us.
Thanks. It's great to be with all of you.
Hey, I was elated when you answered my message. James will attest that I was nagging him for quite some time to have Jeff Stier on the show, and that was always my weekly vote. Jeff Stier.
Thank you.
Yeah, we actually have. We had you on the vape team a while back. I know you did an interview with Dimitri as well.
I think that was shortly after the deeming regulations came out.
Yeah, that's true. And I'm an avid reader of National Review as well, so I'm familiar with your pieces for National Review. And we're delighted to have you with us tonight. There's a couple things we do want to announce here. One of the big things, Dane, of course, coming up end of May here.
Yep. Every year on the 31st of May, the World Health Organization and their partners mark World No Tobacco Day, highlighting the health risks associated with tobacco use and advocating for effective policies to reduce tobacco consumption. Larry Waters, that is, Chad, who is at Snoopy.com, and the good folks at Snooze Central decided that they would counteract the WHO's No Tobacco Day with a broadcast of their own. We liked the idea here at Inside Vaping immensely and happily accepted their invitation. So James and I will be part of a very special live broadcast on the Snooze Central YouTube page to talk about harm reduction. We'll be joining Chad from Snoopy.com, C. Nash X from GoSmokeless.org, as well as his own YouTube channel, and Larry Waters and Matt of Snooze Central. We're really looking forward to this broadcast and hope all of you will join us to talk tobacco harm reduction on the 31st of May at 8 p.m. Eastern Time.
Yes, indeed. Excuse me. I think I'm getting silicosis. I know that's the joke that we
that's always
spin around here. He always talks about silicosis. But I actually don't have any new vape mail this week. I did have some very interesting things happen to me. I went to a party in downtown Chicago over the weekend, and somebody had this mysterious-looking little battery mod. It looked kind of like a miniature Ego, but it was very sleek and nice rubberized mouthpiece and very compact. And he asked about my Mac, and I had my Mac there, and I told him about it, and then he said, well, you want to try my mod? And I picked it up, and then I looked closely at it, and sure enough, it was made for wax. So it wasn't exactly the type of electronic cigarette that I'm used to, and I handed it back to him and declined. But, it's pretty interesting now. It's kind of an interchangeable word. The whole vape is interchangeable, and I guess I should have used e-cigarette, but at the same time, when you have a big mod with a dripper on it, you don't immediately think of e-cigarette or electronic cigarette. The other thing that happened is I was at a new apartment complex in downtown Chicago, and I knew they had a no vaping, no smoking policy inside the building, but I had stepped out onto the terrace to take a couple vapes, and there's a security camera looking out onto the terrace, and somebody came up and told me that I could not vape there either. So I put my device away, and I was very polite, and that was that. But again, even vaping outside on the terrace with no people around you, the restrictions are getting more stringent. And of course, that building had a no smoking policy, so they're within their rights to do that. But it doesn't make it any less stringent or onerous. The other thing too, and we did want to talk about this briefly, we talked about a couple of e-liquid companies that they're going to have to change the name of their products or change their branding at some point. Either after pressure is put on them from outside sources, or just it's negative exposure that can possibly come back on companies. So we're going to show one of them here just because I think people need to be aware of it. And this is a company out of Texas. This is called Toxic Vapors. And their website is actually, let me see if I can pull it up here. My computer is lagging horribly right now, by the way.
You sure that's not Stan Glance's company?
Inhale Toxic. Yeah, so their URL is www.inhaletoxic.com. And their product line, again, they've got a pretty alluring campaign here. It's pretty flashy. I can see behind your eyes. But the e-liquid is called Mercury. So again, kind of a poor choice of names. Especially the URL. It's catchy. It's probably appealing to a younger, hip generation, but at the same time, it's just not the way that I think we want to represent ourselves, especially in this day and age. And to that point, here's what you get if you search on Google for Inhale Toxic e-liquid. So first you get e-cigarette forum talking about an article of some sort. But then you get e-liquid facts, and you get, let's see, this is a good one here. This is actually toxic liquid nicotine and the dangers of e-cigarettes. And then e-cigs liquid nicotine causing poisonings from CNN.com. So again, this is the wrong type of attention. And I'm saddened to see that we still have this issue, Dane. I mean, to me at least.
Yeah, me too. And I'm always curious about the meeting in the boardroom about, let's talk about our campaign. Let's talk about our image. Let's talk about search engine optimization. None of those things were discussed, with the exception of let's have some scantily clad women in my living room. And that was about it for that one.
So we're going to get into the questions for Jeff now, and I know Jerry, you've got something to talk about a little bit later on in the show here, but we're going to go ahead and go right into the questions for Jeff.
Sure. Excellent. Jeff, you've been before lawmakers probably more than anybody, well, maybe with the exception of Greg Conley, defending the e-cig industry. Do you feel that there's been a shift in the tide, even in a small way, in favor of electronic cigarettes with some lawmakers that were staunchly anti-vaping previously?
Well, first, let me set the stage. Thank you for having me on. And you're right about Greg. But I'm not here, just to make it perfectly clear kind of where I'm coming from a public health harm reduction perspective. You said that I've been before the legislators to defend the e-cigarette industry. And certainly I'm supportive of the industry. But when I come out and testify, I'm not doing it for the e-cigarette industry. I'm doing it for public health. I'm doing it for good policy making. You mentioned Larry Waters and Chad and the snooze people. I've been in this game for a long time before e-cigarettes were around, when we were dealing with harm reduction and World No Tobacco Day on other harm reduction issues. So I'm here to represent public health, a kind of a rational viewpoint on public health issues. And is the tide turning? I happen to have here, and it was handed out at the SPADA conference, my column in Vapor Voice. where I talked about my experience testifying alongside Greg in Connecticut in front of the legislature there. It's still an uphill battle. I think there are some bright spots. From my long-term perspective, being involved in this issue, even before e-cigarettes, dealing with snus and getting to know Larry and Chad and that whole wonderful crowd of advocates, we have made tremendous strides in communicating the idea of harm reduction. It is now something, I get the news clips, I see it almost every day, another article talking about the validity of this idea. At SFATA, Mitch Zeller from the FDA acknowledged that e-cigarettes have the potential to improve public health if they regulate them the right way. And so I think there has been not a little bit of progress, but tremendous progress. Now, we haven't converted that progress into legislative victories just yet. But I do think there are some opportunities. And as I wrote in the Vapor Voice article, it's not going to happen on its own. And your industry is so fortunate to have Greg Connolly and to have Cynthia from SFATA and really, really great advocates. But they can't be everywhere at once. Right. This has to be a real grassroots effort. I know there are so many wonderful enthusiasts, you guys doing the show. But until you go out and meet with your local legislators, we're not going to be able to translate that progress into legislative victories. And the kind of the point of my Vapor Voice article was those victories will not come from me going out and testifying, because we can go out there when there's a fire and try to put out the fire. But the real victories will come when you meet with your legislators at the local level before there's even a piece of legislation on the books. There doesn't need to be a law for you to go in there, a law being considered, for you to go in there and to meet with legislators. Now is the time, before there's a bill that's being considered. Legislative sessions around the country are coming to an end now. Legislators will be back home looking for your votes for November or next November. Now is the time to sit down with them and say, look, I know there's no legislative issue before you, but I want to share with you some of the stories that I've seen in my shop, I've seen with my customers. I deal with a wide range of public policy topics. I was in Florida last week dealing with an entirely different issue. And it kind of came up that one of my priorities is e-cigarettes. And an employee at that company that I was meeting with said to me, I heard you mention e-cigarettes. What do you think about them? And you can tell she was a little bit nervous. And I said, well, and I didn't want to get into a whole debate with her if she was going to be an advocate on the other side, although I'm happy to have that conversation. I said, well, I'm out there defending people's right to quit smoking by using e-cigarettes. And she whipped a mod out of her pocket. Not a cigarette. Mod out of her pocket.
She was prepared.
And she said to me, do you know I quit smoking 3 years ago, nothing else worked? And I said, I've heard this story a million times. It's, how many times do you have to hear it over and over and over again? So it's not just a handful of people out there. I think all these people are now going to have to turn into data.
Right.
But eventually it's going to translate into that. But it's not going to happen on its own. And that's why I'm so pleased that you've got Greg and you've got SFATA doing that work. But you talk about this company you mentioned before, and I'm glad to see you do this regularly on the show to shame some of those who deserve shame. But you've got organizations like SFATA out there, which are now kind of putting their seal of approval on products to some degree. In order to be a member of SFATA, you have to meet certain standards, and I think that's wonderful. Sure. And I think the vapors out there need to know that groups like SFATA and CASA and Greg at ABA, my group, the National Center, we're all working to defend your rights. So when you buy products, make sure to buy products that are working with these groups. Don't buy. Yeah. I mean, I guarantee you the company you just mentioned is not a party to these groups, and they shouldn't be. So when you buy products that are investing back into the industry and investing back into public health, investing back into you. And consumers have that choice. Consumers can kind of vote with their pocketbooks and buy products from responsible companies, not just companies that are out to make a quick buck, but companies that are part of the team here. We're all part of a team.
Right.
So, Jerry, you had a question for Jeff as well.
Yeah, it's a multi-part question. And when we talk about companies, we looking at the vaping industry, the small businesses in vaping have been the most innovative and have brought products to market that are actually more effective than anything, that big tobacco is producing. So how do you see the impact of regulation on these businesses, the potential that the barrier to entry for these businesses would inhibit this development and this innovation? And then, isn't this really what the producers of the cigalikes, which is big tobacco, really wants, is to really leave no choice in the market but what they're offering? And how much of their influence is steering the political debate?
Well, certainly big tobacco is worried that so many people are quitting smoking. And the woman I met in Florida, right? She was vaping a mod. She wasn't vaping a cigalike. My message to the community here is, and I know you're constantly being tagged incorrectly as being part of big tobacco, which is the most absurd thing, or at least now you're being called big vapor. I think we need to focus, and certainly if the number 2 tobacco company in the country wants to put you guys out of business, you need to defend yourselves. But I think the focus needs to be on who the real enemies are here. And those are the Stan Glances of the world. I don't think Reynolds is going to persuade FDA. Whatever Reynolds wants, I don't think that's going to have much weight with FDA, for better or for worse, in this case, for better. It's easy to attack them. And they've brought this criticism upon themselves. And I think it's appropriate to speak out against it. But I think the focus here needs to be on the people out there like Stan Glantz, people out there like Tom Frieden at the Centers for Disease Control, and other critics of your industry and of our goal to reduce the harm from smoking, who are attacking e-cigarettes without the science. I think we need to focus on them and on their bad science. And I think everyone recognizes that there is competition now between the innovative small companies and big tobacco. I think that'll sort itself out. I think the market will help answer that. More regulation is not the way, and I have certainly expressed that to people who I know respect my work. That's not the way to go. I think they're starting to hear that message, but I think we need to look forward, and in terms of fighting these regulatory battles, it needs to be about debunking the junk science and the unscientific claims about these products. But there is no question that the way forward is through innovation, through private sector, profit-driven innovation. That's what if I could use the word sparked, even though there's no spark involved here. That's what sparked this industry, and I think we need to. My view is that the products have improved tremendously in the past few years, but they're not good enough yet. And the only answer to that is innovation. And we can't look to Stan Glantz for innovation. We can't look to the Centers for Disease Control for innovation. We can't look to the FDA or the WHO for innovation. Innovation will only come from the private sector in a very limited regulatory environment. I think these products need to be regulated, but in a way that doesn't stifle the innovation and the idea that these products can be more appealing to adult smokers, and that's where the focus needs to be. And let me give you one. And let me give you one legislative example. One of the problems with the challenges I think that Mitch Zeller at the FDA has is he believes, I think wrongly, but he believes that his hands are tied and that the grandfather date for a predicate product is February 15, 2007, the date the bill was introduced into Congress. There's no rational basis for that being the grandfather date. And as you've probably heard people like Bill Godshall say over and over again, that if that is indeed the grandfather date, the date for a predicate product, February 15, 2007, there are very, very few products that go back that far. And the ones that do weren't very good. Mm-hmm. So the deeming regulations, as we expect them to come out, maybe as soon as next month, would over a couple of years effectively ban all of the great products that are helping people quit smoking. So there is a piece of legislation that was introduced late last month. I think there are only a handful of co-sponsors right now, but it would do a technical fix to the bill that gives the FDA authority to regulate tobacco and e-cigarettes. And it would say that the deeming regulation grandfather date would be moved forward from 2007 to the date
HR 2058.
Yeah.
Yeah.
at least to the effective date of the deeming regulations, which has some rational basis. Otherwise, we're in this bizarre world where old, more harmful products have a lower legal burden, regulatory burden, to the new, less harmful products that are more appealing to smokers. So it makes no sense. So there's a technical legislative fix that Representative Cole from Oklahoma introduced, and I think things like that represent some legislative progress. That's not going to be some big sexy issue, but it's something that could at least remove some of the real difficulties.
Sure.
That are imminent.
Yeah. So, Jeff, we've talked about applying the principles of triage. I'm sure you're familiar with the term triage as it relates to like a emergency room or something like that. But we've talked about applying principles of triage to advocacy. And again, I'm always willing to change my opinion if somebody gives me enough information to indicate that it's wrong. But considering the relatively few lobbyists working within the vapor industry specifically, I mean, obviously, and I'm talking about open systems when I'm saying that, because of course you do have, Big Tobacco has a stable of lobbyists that they have for most states that are familiar with things that are going on locally. But we have relatively few, and we've often wondered here at the show if public use bans are a good direction to focus resources on. Particularly when there are issues like excessive taxation, states passing overly restrictive regulations regarding e-liquid production, flavor bans, which is a huge one. How do you feel about public use bans? I'm talking about ones that are sensible in scope, not ones that are affecting vape shops and your own apartment and things like that. How do you feel about those? Do you think the fight against them is futile, and do you believe it's wise to use limited resources to fight those bans?
So I'm speaking to you from New York, and New York State has been considering public use ban, and I don't have much hope that we're going to defeat those public use bans. I don't think the industry advocates should pour all of their resources into that fight, because I do think for a large degree, it's in most states, it is a lost cause. But my concern is when you give in, you say, a lot of the public use bans I've read the statutes. They're very short statutes, and they say for the purpose of the Clean Air Act of New York or whatever the state is, vapor products will be considered as if they were cigarettes. And so there's a certain point to fighting those, to at least standing up and having your voice heard as to why that's a bad idea. I don't think all that being said, because I think it starts you down the slippery slope. It'll open up the door next year to the taxes and some of the other bad restrictions. But I testified last winter in Los Angeles about a carve out to the public use ban, which would have been to allow vaping in bars. And one of the concerns about vaping is, well, kids might see it. I think that's absurd. But yeah, if you ban vaping inside of a bar, people who just quit smoking using these products will now have to go outside of the bar with smokers and have kids see them. So let them vape in the bar, and let them have good ventilation in there. We lost that by a close margin, but having that debate allowed us to educate legislators. So I think there's something to be said for standing up. Absolutely, you're 100% right that taxes are a priority, because I've seen some really, really bad proposals out there. Flavor bans would be disastrous. I'm not a cigarette smoker. I don't even vape, right? Because I don't inhale. So maybe I'm a great example, because I've been to the conferences. I've gotten my free samples. They don't appeal to me, not even to flavored ones. So I think taxes and flavors at the local level need to be the priorities, because if we lose out on that, it's a real problem. But I want to convey kind of a broader idea on that topic, and I raised this issue with Mitch Zeller not only at the SFATA conference in Chicago last week, but a couple weeks earlier at the NATO show in Las Vegas, where he gave a very similar talk, and that is the concept as he has talked about, of harm reduction, of a risk continuum, of regulating nicotine products based on their risk. He at the FDA endorses that. You don't have to believe Greg or Cynthia or myself or anybody else that e-cigarettes have the potential to be a boon to public health. They just need to be regulated with the appropriate right touch. And there's been a lot of pressure on the FDA to come out and finalize the deeming regulations and then start instituting more and more rules about e-cigarettes. And Mitch Zeller's defense for not having acted sooner is because what he's saying is that that the FDA is doing patterns of use studies. He calls them the PATH studies. And I have problems with how those are being done, but the FDA right now is saying that it's doing the science first before it regulates them because it wants to regulate them in such a way that keeps them out of hands of kids, keep dual use down, etc., yet also not stifle an industry that has the potential to do good for public health. And my concern is that with this impatience, there's a lack of federal regulation. States and local governments are popping up with not only the public use bans, but the taxes and the flavor bans and all sorts of bad ideas. And they're saying, well, we shouldn't wait. We shouldn't take the risk and wait. And what I think, if you parse Mitch Zeller's words carefully, this is the Obama administration's chief tobacco regulator. He is essentially saying that we're not acting too quickly because we want to get the right balance and we want it to be based on the science. If we just acted now and waited for the science and then adjusted it based on the science, we, the FDA, have potential to undermine public health, undermine the public health good of e-cigarettes. So we're not regulating them yet because we don't want to get it wrong. Yet at the same time, at the state and local level, they're not waiting for the science. And it's important for us to convey to state and local legislators that the Obama administration is not dragging its feet. It's making sure that it does the science first. And if the FDA and the Obama administration won't act quickly on e-cigarettes because it wants to get the science right for fear of over-regulating, state and local legislatures should listen carefully to that and make sure that their science directs policy making and that the policy making doesn't come before the science. Because as Mitch Zeller says, if you read his words closely, that can undermine the potential benefits of these products, and we don't want to do that.
Yeah. I've got another question for you too, and this kind of leads us back around to the whole toxic vapor thing, and also some of the other companies we talked about in the past here. And part of that, Jeff, and it's been difficult for us because, on the one hand, this is something that I believe has a huge benefit, a potential benefit for public health. And it pains me to see companies within the industry, and I'm not even going to call them industry because, that's a very loose term when it comes to this sector when you have mom and pop juice companies popping up overnight. So the whole idea of self-regulation, people said we're capable of self-regulation. We need sensible regulation. That's what we need. Because as far as self-regulation, the only way that can possibly work is if there's public shaming and everything else, and it's just kind of a messy scenario without some type of oversight over it.
And
obviously,
that self-regulation is essential. Your industry will be regulated regardless, right?
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that the industry shouldn't behave as responsibly as it can.
Sure.
I applaud you for the public shaming. I got to tell you, though, that there will be people like Senator Blumenthal will find the worst actor that you've shamed. He may watch your videos and say, who are they shaming? I'm going to drag them before my committee. Yeah. He's the one that ought to be shamed.
Right.
So on the one hand, I think it's important to shame them. I think it's important to be responsible and to encourage people to only buy from responsible vendors, etc. Yet on the other hand, as well as you self-regulate, that's not going to fend off the advocates like Senator Blumenthal,
opportunists,
who will find the worst actors in your industry, broadly speaking, and suggest that they represent you when they don't. Now, how many times have I heard stories from small vape shop owners where they've kicked 17-year-olds out of the store? They came in and said, "I just want to buy something," and they said, "No, we're not even letting you in." You don't hear that before the committee,
right? Exactly.
Right? So, as responsible as industry is, you're going to be looked at in the worst possible light. That's just the way it is. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't still be responsible, that you shouldn't still shame the bad actors and shun them and encourage your listenership and your viewership not to support those companies.
And there's plenty of companies out there who are doing it the right way. And, I know at this FADA conference, they talked a lot about the deeming regs and the expenses that it will incur to have a SKU. If you're talking about actually being viable long-term, and I believe they were talking directly in the e-liquid space when they were talking about this, but one of the things that you see is kind of lacking, or that we have some room for improvement in, is the quality of the clean rooms or the quality of the facilities that the e-liquid is mixed in. Of course, ISO certification would be a plus, and then also just GMP, good manufacturing practices. So I think those are things that you're going to see. I hate to say it, but it's going to be a situation where it's cream of the crop, the cream rising to the top. And
I'll give some free advice to those that are interested in this topic. Do it now, be compliant now, or it's going to be too late later.
Right.
Yeah, and it's there's companies out there who are definitely doing it now. I mean, I've got one right here.
Yeah.
So this was just a little simple ISO 6 Class 1000, or I think it's Class 1000. Yeah, Class 1000 clean room. Nice little certification. Very clean e-liquid. That's Mod Fuel e-liquid. Pick this up at Vape Bash. Nice child safety caps on them. Very clear labeling. So that's an example of somebody who I believe is looking towards the future, or at least positioning themselves properly. But over the years, we've seen an increase in the use of logos and names that are eerily similar to things like fruit juices. I've seen one that's called Juicy Juice before. Cereals, candy brands, sugary desserts. Obviously, we agree that the plethora of flavors is key to the product success as a long-term reduced harm replacement for smokers desiring the freedom from combustible products. I think you'd agree with that, wouldn't you, Jeff? I mean, the appeal of menthol and tobacco flavors, excluding everything else, is very limited.
And I'll go even further. One of the concerns that Mitch Zeller and the FDA have is of this concept of dual use, that people are going to use e-cigarettes as a bridge to get them over restrictions, but they're really just going to stay addicted to nicotine. They're going to keep smoking. What I have heard over and over from vapors who quit smoking is that it's the flavors that kept them away, because they learned that they don't like the flavor of harsh tobacco and menthol. So the flavors are not a public health enemy. They're an enemy of big tobacco.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. So the question that I had, though, specifically, I was just thinking, if you're going to be a responsible industry member, I feel like vendors need to minimize the appeal to youth, and to develop original branding rather than leapfrogging off an established brand. I mean, obviously, you can get C&D letters, you can see legal ramifications brought to bear when you're doing this, but a lot of them aren't right now. They're not seeing those things. What do you think is going to happen down the road? I mean, what type of legal ramifications is this going to bring about?
Look, to the casual observer who watches the evening news or reads an occasional headline in USA Today, you would think that the number one flavor of e-cigarettes is gummy bear. Because that's all you hear about.
It's true.
Yeah.
That's all you hear about.
Yeah.
And I don't know what gummy bear is, but I know a lot of adults who like whatever that flavor is. But I think the industry needs to ask itself: is there a need to give such easy arguments to the opposition? There will always be one small shop selling gummy bear or some cartoon character, and it goes back to what I was saying earlier: is we're not going to be able to appease the activists on the other side, but we shouldn't give away any free points either.
Yeah. So I've got a couple questions about your dog, because I noticed your dog. You've got a travel companion, and he's a service dog. Is that right?
Well, he's a working dog. He's
Okay.
training right now to do crisis response, to go into a situation like a 9/11 or an earthquake or an airplane crash, God forbid, and be there for first responders. So he's not a service dog. He doesn't perform any function beyond a pet for me. But I'm training him as I'm his handler. And we were in the library today, we're reading with kids, and we do things like that. But he's training to be a real working dog. So
I've got a couple pictures of him here. His name is BB.
like BB King.
Oh, very nice. Yeah, I had another picture of him on the plane with you, I believe.
Yep,
Yeah,
there he is. Right in the bulkhead.
So, yeah, I noticed that you had a link there to where you'd gotten his training at crisisresponsecanines.org.
Right.
And I read a little bit about it. Very interesting, how they train the dogs and the purpose there. So I love dogs, but neither of mine are trained. They're very, very ill-behaved lap dogs.
I still love him. I'll have to show you. I showed a couple people one of his tricks, and he's a Labrador Retriever, so he loves to eat.
Yeah.
And I taught him as part of the training to wait. I say wait, and then I say okay, and then he'll eat very quickly. He'll go get his food or his treat. So I have now created BB, the harm reduction dog. And while I don't encourage tobacco use on any product he's only 3.5, so he's a minor.
Yeah.
But I'll put a treat in front of him, and instead of saying wait, I'll say cigarette, and he'll stare at it. And I'll stare at it, and then I'll say vapor, and he'll eat it.
That's great. That is exactly what this industry needs as a mascot. Exactly.
That's right. BB. So I know people probably thought this was going to be a snooze-free episode of Inside Vaping, but Dane and I actually use snooze. We like it quite a lot, especially Swedish Match's product. Their Gothia Tech standard. I'm sure you're familiar with that, Jeff. They're an excellent company, and it is a very viable alternative for somebody who's seeking a reduced harm tobacco product. But I had a question. We did want to talk a little bit about the modified risk classification that the FDA can, at their option, apply to a tobacco product. But first, let's talk about the current requirements they have on snus imports into the U.S. And Dane, I think you have. Do you have an example of that, or do you want me to? I can grab one if you want me to.
Yeah, can you grab one? Because
Yes.
I had forgot to do so, and I actually took the label off of this one with my ADD, which I probably shouldn't have done.
I can find a can here that still has the labels on it.
Yeah, I'm usually bad about taking them off. I put them right in the freezer with them on, and then I take them off later, usually.
Of course, I don't have the one I'm looking for.
But there are more than one label on them now. I guess in the past, what they used to do is they would ship the labels on a separate sheet and just put them in the box along with the shipment, but now they're required to actually place them on the product. And it's troublesome.
Yeah, here's a can as it comes from Sweden. So, loosely translated, the Swedish label just says that this is a tobacco product and can be addictive. And I believe it said something about can possibly cause health problems. Mm-hmm. This is the U.S. label. This product can cause mouth cancer. There's a variety of different labels. One of them actually says, warning, this product is not a safe alternative to cigarettes. There's 5 or 6 different warnings on these cans. But the big issue here is that, again, there's a plethora of evidence to the contrary that is actually showing that, if you look at the facts, and I know you're familiar with this as well, Jeff, I mean, Sweden has some of the lowest instances of cancer in males within the world, and at the same time, they have a male population that, I mean, their preferred method of nicotine intake is via Swedish snus.
That's right.
So I'm shocked at this point because, of course, for those of you who aren't familiar, Swedish Match did apply for a modified risk label classification with the FDA. I think it was it last year that they applied?
Yes.
Or was it? Yeah. And that document, they produced and presented a very well thought out, thorough case for their products being considered for modified risk in the U.S. market. And to the best of my knowledge, despite over 200,000 pages of long-term health studies and conclusive evidence that snus is indeed safer than cigarette smoking, it was denied by the MRTP board. But I don't believe it's a final. They still have to vote on it, correct?
Yeah. So that was the Tobacco Product Scientific Advisory Committee, or TPSAC, which voted against giving the modified risk claim. And I think it's a very important case, even if you're not a snus user, if you're interested in e-cigarettes, to see how the FDA is working here. The questions that members of TPSAC asked about snus were very important questions. For instance, what are the risks for a pregnant woman using snus? Those are very important, legitimate scientific questions. However, those questions were completely irrelevant to the charge before the committee. The committee was asked, from a scientific perspective, is snus less harmful than smoking? It's a very straightforward question. As you pointed out in some 119,000 pages, I think, they laid out why, from data in Sweden and elsewhere, why it's very clear from an epidemiological perspective, from a toxicological perspective, why snus is less harmful than smoking. You don't need to be a toxicologist or an epidemiologist to know that if you're taking tobacco and burning it, you're making it more dangerous. So it's quite clear that if you're not burning it, while it's not completely safe, it's less harmful than smoking. Right. And TPSAC was unable. Some members got that, but some TPSAC members, the majority, did not go with it. Now, it's very important. And I asked Mitch Zeller about this at the NATO show in Las Vegas when he spoke about 3 weeks ago. And TPSAC is an advisory committee. It's a scientific advisory committee. And like all the other FDA advisory committees, the FDA is not required to follow its advice. And in this particular instance, the FDA would be well advised not to follow that advice, because while the TPSAC raised important issues, those issues were not relevant. But it is important that we have a good regulatory structure. You were mentioning the Swedish Match products. I've got a product here that I got on a recent trip to Israel. And don't be confused.
That's the only place you could get it, isn't it?
It's true.
Yeah. It's Marlboro Snus.
Yeah.
It's part of a joint venture with Swedish Match.
Yep.
And if you look closely, if I can coordinate this right, they haven't figured out the warnings labels yet, because it talks about cigarettes cause strokes. This is snus, right? And the warning label on the package of snus says cigarettes cause stroke and heart disease. Okay. And maybe drinking while pregnant could cause problems, but that's not relevant to this product. And interestingly, if you look at the back on the Israel product, there is not only the warning label, but if you look at the triangle K, that is a kosher certification. This product is kosher. The rabbis have endorsed it, but the government has yet to get behind reducing risk for consumers. They're still giving them consumers advice as if this were a combustible product, and it's not. So this is important whether you use snus or whether you don't use snus. If you're interested in e-cigarettes, the concept of harm reduction, we need to continue communicating that. And even if you don't use the product, I think it's important to encourage the FDA not to listen to the advisory committee, because its questions were off base and its conclusion was irrelevant to the question for it.
And to that point, wasn't one of their main reasons that there wasn't enough information or studies done on dual use scenarios? So once again, we're talking about the same thing that we're going to be facing with e-cigarettes, or have already faced in some situations.
And I got to tell you, along those lines, if the long-term data, which is available on snus, was not enough to satisfy the FDA, your industry has real problems.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Because if you talk about the scope of some of the health studies, you're talking about one in particular that detailed, wasn't it 400 construction workers for a period of, I don't know, it was decades.
Yeah.
You got World Health Organization data.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's true.
So, yeah, that's the main reason that I brought this up. And the other thing, too, is have they labeled any tobacco product as modified risk at this point? Because there's other tobacco products on the market that qualify for that. If you look at quantitative data with cigarettes being 100 and something else being harm reduced.
So that's a regulatory procedural step that they would have to take. They would have to apply for modified risk. And the company that's done it and invested the resources and has the data to do it is General. And they hopefully the FDA won't listen to TPSAC. But in terms of other companies, yes, they have the science. I think it was maybe 2 years ago, your friends over at Reynolds put in a citizens petition to change the warning label on their snus products. And the FDA denied it. I think I saw, again, that just today they announced that they're still denying it.
I saw Lou Ritter post about that a little bit earlier.
What can I say? There are regulatory hurdles that these products have to overcome. The best shot at it so far is the one that General Snus is taking now. And they may have complicated it by asking to change the label and get a reduced risk claim and combining that into one application. That's a valid question about whether they went about it procedurally the right way. But I think the science is strongly in their favor. You don't need to be a scientist to understand that burning tobacco makes it more dangerous, and therefore it should be straightforward that not burning tobacco, while not safe to use, is certainly somewhere lower on the risk continuum than cigarettes. And when you look at that risk continuum, we don't know exactly where to place each of these products and where e-cigarettes go. And you can't even just talk about e-cigarettes as one product, as you well know. I don't think the public health community gets that. I strongly believe, and my closing message to you is that you need to communicate that the public health community is now driven by an ideology that is entirely divorced from science. And when we speak to the regulators, we need to communicate to them that we have science behind what we're saying. You don't need to believe our science. You can look at the World Health Organization data. But there's got to come a point where sound science drives public policy once again. Right now, I think some of the Stan Glances of the world have become so entirely unhinged and away from the science that regulators, reasonable legislators, and there are some out there, are beginning to hear the message. Mitch Zeller, the FDA, the Obama administration's top FDA official on tobacco, understands harm reduction. Yeah. Whether we've convinced him all the way and whether the law that's in place will allow him to regulate the products reasonably is still an open question. But you've got the Obama administration's FDA talking about harm reduction, so we've made huge progress.
My concern is that Zeller, while he's in a very good condition or situation to make recommendations and obviously kind of spark some sort of discourse on this, his continuum of risk is very much in line with what I would like to see and what I believe would be a large benefit. I'm sure all of us agree on that to public health. But the issue, of course, is, and you've seen this with the recent forced resignations from the FDA's advisory panel and some of the other things going on internally, that's an ever-changing dynamic. And I guess that's where part of the concern is because even with the modified risk application, I mean, that doesn't begin and end with Mitch Zeller. Obviously, despite what he may hold true, it may not go that way. And that's why I'm frankly very concerned for vapor products, because, again, if you look at a product that has such a long history of health studies like snus, and then look at vapor products with a relatively short period of use, even though there have been some excellent studies during that time period, it's concerning. Yeah,
absolutely. And you're right, it doesn't begin and end with Mitch Zeller. I think as much as we sometimes like to criticize Mr. Zeller, for the Obama administration's top tobacco regulator, I think he's fantastic. I got to say that, given the other possible options. But this is a slow regulatory process. There's no doubt going to be litigation after the deeming regulations go through. There may be another. How long is Mitch Zeller going to be there? His replacement, whether he's appointed by a Democrat or Republican. That's who we need to be educating now. I think it's important for the industry to continue to be responsible. And I'm so pleased to see what you're doing to shame those that aren't. We shouldn't rely on self-regulation. We need to be getting out there in front of the regulators and doing so responsibly and sharing with them the science. But I'll tell you, if the FDA follows TPSAC's advice, and if even snus can't get a modified risk, we may have to. I think then it will be ripe to go back and look at the legislation. Right now, it's hard to convince legislators who are so busy with other things at the federal level to go ahead and change the law. They want to see it whether it works or not first. If all the data there is on snus is not enough to meet the legal regulatory hurdles to get a modified reduced claim, to me that's a very good argument to go to the Hill and say, look, this law isn't working, because I think they have the gold standard for a reduced risk claim, and if they can't make it, no other product's going to make it, and we're going to be left with the combustible product, and nobody wants that except big tobacco.
Yeah, and to that point, we've got a short video that we want to play for people. This is about sponsored bills, who writes the laws, and it's a pretty entertaining little piece, so we're going to go ahead and play that now. Let me see if I can pull this up.
Out. It's time to reveal one of the Capitol's best-kept secrets. Sponsored bills. Yes, if you're a lawmaker in Sacramento, you need never touch pen to paper. Lobbyists and outside interest groups can do the work for you.
But I thought regular people got their state legislator to write bills for them.
Get with the times, little scamp. Interest groups can write just the bill they want, then pick their favorite legislator to put his or her name on it. We're talking lobbyists, corporations, unions, associations, nonprofits, for-profits, groups with money and political muscle who want to see their very own bill become a law. Sure, some bills are written in the traditional way by a lawmaker, but we don't know how many, because lawmakers aren't even required to say whether a bill is sponsored. So we don't really know who is behind many of these bills. A bill could be sponsored by the Association of Pothole Manufacturers and introduced by State Senator Joe Sacto. Or Joe Sacto could just say he wrote it entirely by himself. No one has to know who actually wrote the bill. Transparency schmansparency. There are all kinds of sponsored bills. And also bills that may or may not be sponsored, depending on what a lawmaker's interpretation of sponsorship is at a given time on a given day. You don't have to know, right? What we do know is that interest groups always have bills to feed lawmakers. And some lawmakers seek out bills written by interest groups. Remember, Joe Sacto need never touch pen to paper. Joe Sacto may sometimes touch pen to paper, we just don't know. And with over 2,000 registered lobbyists in California, Joe's friends just might come in handy when he's looking for campaign contributions. Do voters really need to know who is actually writing the laws in the great state of California? Who cares? We've got sponsored bills to introduce. Sponsored bills may or may not be designated as sponsored. Lawmakers are under no obligation to reveal a bill's true author. Voters are subject to having their laws written by unelected individuals or interest groups.
I thought that was pretty brilliant, though.
It is, and a big thanks to WKQED for this educational video. And I believe it should replace the old "I'm Just a Bill" video from the Schoolhouse Rock series.
Yeah, well, so much for altruism in politics. We should just teach our kids that it's just another business, and most politicians really don't give a damn unless you're a wealthy special interest. I mean, it's so disheartening.
Yeah, so, and you think about it, 2,000 registered lobbyists in California, but how many of them are lobbying for vapor products? I mean, I know there are some lobbyists in California. I know SVADA has a presence there, and there's some other organizations that have representatives. But Big Tobacco has a full quiver of lobbyists just to assuage any fears that you might have. So closed systems should be fine.
I gotta say, as someone who has worked in Washington and dealt inside the Beltway, and I know the power of lobbyists. In this case, I think it's quite clear that your industry will not be able to rely on lobbyists, and the only way to achieve the victories that I think we together seek is not to rely on other people to do this, but it's to get out there and meet with your legislators yourself.
Yeah, that's true. And to that point, speaking of allegedly sponsored bills, an Indiana update, of course, HB 1432 signed into law. So Hoosiers need to remember this when it's time to vote again. And we have a couple individuals to thank for this bill, but fortunately, my representative actually voted against it, so I'm pretty happy about that. But we need to be vigilant, and unfortunately, I think this is a situation where if we had a few lobbyists or even one lobbyist that was actively present and working with legislators, it may have made a difference. And I'm not saying that conclusively, because of course there was some good work done by Hoosier Vapors, and store owners and vapors showed up in force to the public hearings, and there were some very good testimonies. But unfortunately, unless this was a foregone conclusion type of situation, which it may have been, because we've talked about the links back to Monument Vapor and casinos and some other special interests within the state. But it's just disappointing to see it turn out this way. And frankly, I hope this doesn't become a blueprint for other states to follow when it comes to regulating e-liquid companies. So anyway, that's pretty much it for that. And I'm looking here. I think we're pretty much out of time. Jeff, thank you very much for joining us. I really appreciate you being on the program.
Thank you, Jeff.
It's been great to have you.
Thanks for having me on. It was a fun conversation. I imagine in the coming weeks and months we'll have more to talk about.
Yes, definitely.
Absolutely true.
So where are you headed to next? I mean, are you? I noticed from looking at your blog that basically you have a variety of different interests that you speak to, and you do these interviews. So what's next on your agenda?
I'll be on the Bill Martinez live radio show Thursday morning, talking about that National Review article that I had yesterday about how Home Depot and Lowe's are caving to environmental activists. And I got to tell you, I see these trends over and over again.
Yeah.
And all of these issues are somehow connected.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you can say, well, what does Home Depot and Lowe's and flooring and chemicals and in flooring products have to do with me? Well, there was the issue that I wrote about was slightly different, but there's been a big controversy. 60 Minutes pushed this issue on formaldehyde and flooring. A lot of the same plaintiffs' lawyers that are behind that campaign to scare consumers and go after industry pushed the issue of formaldehyde. And certainly formaldehyde at high levels of exposure is harmful. But I think your industry knows a lot about how formaldehyde can be used to misinform consumers and scare consumers. And what happens is people hear formaldehyde and they say, oh, no, that's terrible. And they shut off. And your industry has been a victim to that. And we know why the formaldehyde claims against you guys were invalid claims and unrealistic and not real-world exposures. We're seeing that in the same vein here with the flooring issue. So a lot of these issues are all the same, and I love it when I tweet something out Jeff A. Stier, Stier, Jeff, my middle initial A, Stier, on Twitter, and someone who is obviously an advocate of e-cigarettes gets it and tweets out something that I've written on an entirely different topic. Because if that starts to happen, the people who are interested in these other issues and the food issues I write about, if you see the common trend, maybe instead of it just being vapors voting, you'll all come together and recognize that there's a coalition led by far left-wing activists, by plaintiffs' lawyers, by radical left-wing groups who are pushing this agenda, whether it's against the flooring industry, whether it's against big food, whether it's against your industry, whatever it is. It's all driven by the Stan Glantz ideology. And you look at some of these people that have been in the tobacco wars before, they're also the ones suing McDonald's for making people fat. Eventually, people will come to their senses and see that there's a thread that ties us all together.
I definitely see a connection there, too, as well. You talked about the formaldehyde thing with the flooring, and, of course, I read the piece that you co-wrote speaking about Tom Colicchio and the GMO issue and some of the things that he's been pushing pretty heavily. And there's definitely
he's no friend of your industry. I guarantee you.
Oh, yeah. No friend of
your industry. Because they're driven by the same ideology.
Yeah. And also, you've seen it. We see it in the media, too. And I know we saw it. Last week there was a Simpsons episode that dealt with it, of course, and it may have been humorous, but at the same time it was a little bit of a slap. And then also this week I just watched an episode of Nurse Jackie, which is a show on Showtime, and again, another reference to an electronic cigarette, and the guy was drawing on it, and it had a banana flavoring, and she said, those things make you look really douchey. And then she tried it, and she's like, that's nasty. It was just like the negative connotation is out there. So I think there's a certain level of calculation to that stuff. Without being a conspiracy theorist, I don't think you're going to find a wholehearted endorsement coming out of one of those programs. So, well, we're not going to keep you any longer. Thank you very much for being with us, Jeff, and best of luck to you in all your endeavors, and hopefully we'll speak to you again soon.
I'm looking forward to it. Thanks, everyone.
Thank
you, Jeff.
All right, so that was Jeff Stier, and I don't know, I think we could probably bring Ed back in, but we're already over time.
That's all right. We can go. We have one or two stories we can put in here.
Go ahead and try to call Ed back in.
I know we had a piece on 5 ponds this week, did we not?
We did. Let me see. Yeah, and I know the Plumes guys talked about this a while back. Let's see. There we go. There's the green.
There's Ed.
There's Ed.
What's going on?
Except now, now Jerry is Jeff.
Jerry is Jeff Stier now.
And I'm Kilroy again.
Ed is Dane. Here we go. I'll just do this. Wait a minute. That still doesn't fix it. Let me get rid of that.
Ed looks like he's being...
Where's, I need to find Jerry's... Oh, there's Jerry's lower third. There we go. Look at that. I can just drag and drop it.
Nice.
Except I got to get Ed's. There. Now my screen region OCD has been assuaged. So
Excellent.
Anyway, yeah, we're talking about the 5 pawns. Okay. Mm-hmm. Interestingly enough, if you interpret the new Indiana law the way it is written, it appears that the new 5 pawns line, which replaces PG with a alternative, which is known as propanediol, which I'm probably butchering that name. It's PD. It's an all-natural alternative to PG, which is naturally derived from cornstarch fermented with corn sugar. Well, interestingly enough, according to the Indiana law, I don't believe they'll be able to sell that liquid within the state of Indiana because PD is not on our ingredients list as being a component of e-liquid.
Wow.
So we have an approved ingredients list. So that's something they'll have to look into.
That's a good point. Well, I looked directly at their website, and I went to Five Ponds' site, and lo and behold, sure enough, Five Ponds, they introduced a new line of PG alternative vapor liquids. And this was out of Irvine, California. I believe it was on April 30th. Five Ponds, the world's leading maker of premium vapor liquid, announced today it is launching a new line of vapor products that feature an alternative to propylene glycol. There are two segments of the vape fan base that have been asking for a PG alternative, but for very different reasons, said Five Ponds founder, CEO, and mixologist Rodney Jarabek. We are proud to be the first in the vapor industry to provide a PG alternative vapor liquid that not only addresses those who experience an irritation to PG, but also delivers a phenomenal taste experience for those who want more vapor production from their vapor liquid. The new line is a 50-50 blend of vegetable glycerin and propanediol, an all-natural alternative to PG, which James very wisely stated is naturally derived from cornstarch fermented with corn sugar. PD has approval from EcoCert, which is an internationally recognized natural and organic seal, and the Natural Product Association, which is a U.S.-based natural personal care certification, and is approved, and here's the kicker for me, by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, as well as certified and verified as GRAS, USDA 100% bio-based USP, FCC kosher halal, and FEMA GRAS.
Man, that's
PD offers, I know it's a lot. PD offers a non-irritating natural alternative to PG.
Here's my thing. I understand that they're just explaining the PG alternative product, and it may comply with all of this. But again, we've already talked about this. GRAS, generally recognized as safe. The inhalable portion of the GRAS certification is not direct lung inhalation, which is what we're doing now. And again, this isn't a knock against Five Ponds, okay? I'm just saying this is something that does not have the established track record of PG. That's all I'm saying.
My question to Five Ponds is this. Why now? Why now?
Well,
PG sensitivity has been going on in this industry for quite some time, and we know it has. Has it taken this long to formulate an answer, or is this something to try to mainline the product into a different category? Why now? Why now?
Well, Jerry actually linked us to another company that was doing this. Who was that, Jerry?
Was that Palm Beach?
Palm Beach Vapor Company, I believe.
The new, yeah.
Yeah, they had some sort of alternative to PG that they had developed as well. But I mean, I understand your question. I do think it has more to do with the sensitivity, personally, with people who have allergies or sensitivities to PG. But again, I'm just saying I wouldn't just go out there and embrace this wholeheartedly, because I don't know enough about it. I did a little bit of research on PD, and it all had to do with the way it was processed. So if it was processed in an improper way, you could have some undesirable byproducts.
Well, and going back to Jeff Stier's conversations about Tom Colicchio and GMO arguments, is the corn that this particular product that's derived from, is it GMO corn? Most corn is.
Yeah.
So there's another ancillary argument altogether. I don't know. I look at a product like this and I see its timing is suspect to me. Not because I'm closed-minded about new sensitivity alternatives. I think it's a great thing. But I think there are other compounds out there that we can look at besides corn. I think we might want to look in a different direction.
Well, again, I don't know how much research was done. This is the thing that's concerning to me. And I know maybe they don't have that information present. But whenever you're talking about changing something that's been the established base for years, I mean, even with the relatively short history that we have as vapors, we still have pretty much always used the same components, except for the Brits that used PEG 400 or whatever it was for a while. Right. I would certainly prefer to see a more comprehensive rundown of any type of inhalation testing or testing that they've done on this component.
Right. The certifications for this product are a moot point to me because this is not the use that this product was initially intended for.
Right. So anyway, I guess the bottom line here is the jury's out. And I like the guys from Pied Ponds, man. I mean, I've talked to Jay, I've talked to Rod, I've talked to these other people that work for Pied Ponds, and they're great guys. And they make a product that is, well regarded, and Gambit is delicious. I used to vape Gambit all the time, but this is just something that I'm approaching with hesitation. So that's the only reason that we're really bringing it up at this point.
You know what I find interesting though, and this thought just passed my mind. I know we've thought about this before. We never gave a crap when we smoked.
Oh, that is yes, that is absolutely true.
We didn't care. We just smoked.
I did towards the tail end. Towards the tail end, I thought I was doing the right thing by buying American Spirits or Nat Sherman's or, the tobacco that supposedly was as close to pure as you could get, even though they all have additives and they all have, the resulting heavy metals from being grown in a field that's sprayed and never rotated for generations and generations. Yeah. But, yeah, I get that point as well.
Yeah, it's something else. That's for darn sure.
So HR 2058, and we talked about this briefly, but when we had Jeff on, but 2058 would move the grandfather date to the final date of the FDA deeming regulation, and this is a bill that this has got to happen. Realistically, it's got to happen, or all you're going to be left with are 808s and the old pen-style batteries and Cigalikes, whatever Cigalikes existed. What is it, before 2007? 2007? Yeah.
Yep. Mark 10.
As Nick Grimm-Green would say, retro vaping.
Retro.
Yeah. It's all going to be retro vaping.
Get your blue foam ready.
You can't even get a Mark 10 at that point. Well, you'll probably be able to get one eventually once they go through their approval process, but
it definitely lying around.
Yeah.
They still make those.
Blue foam. I think that's pretty much it, man. If there's anything else you want to cover, just go ahead and bring it up.
No, only very quickly and very briefly, two things. We'll put the link in the show description. 22 states have proposed e-cig taxes in 2015. So in case there was any question about who's doing it and when they're doing it, there's an entire list on cspnet.com. And I highly advise looking at it because there are not many states that are being excluded. And they also break down the percentages of said taxes, and a lot of them are utterly ridiculous. They're utterly ridiculous. And then retouching on a point at the beginning of the show, don't forget May 31st, we will be doing a joint broadcast with Snooze Central over on their channel with Chad from Snoopy C. Nash and Larry and Matt of Snooze Central. And we're definitely looking forward to that. So we're going to have everybody all in one house.
And And do me a favor, will you convert some of those guys over to vaping since, they stole some of my vaping buddies over to snus? Jam some vaping down their throat.
Hey, C. Nash already vapes. He already does. He actually does
needs
both at the same time.
That's right.
He's a triple user.
Yeah, if there is a definition of dual user, it is C. Nash. He is definitely a dual user. There is no doubt.
So,
what, go on?
Oh, I was just going to say real quick, Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids, I'm just going to go ahead and superimpose this up here. They have a new petition that is circling right now. Our kids can't wait. Tell President Obama to set rules for e-cigarettes and cigars. So if you scroll down through this form letter email, number 3, okay? Ban flavors and restrict marketing that appeal to kids. Fruit and candy flavors are banned in cigarettes, and they should be banned in cigars and e-cigarettes as well. And the same marketing restrictions that currently apply to cigarettes should apply to e-cigarettes and cigars. So they're going after flavors with this.
Mm-hmm.
And, of course, Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids is not exactly a new kid on the block. They've been around a while. This is probably going to pick up some steam. Again, they mentioned specifically, and Jeff called it, this protect kids from e-cigarettes. From 2013 to 2014, e-cigarette use among high school students rose from 4.5% to 13.4% for high school students. This isn't surprising because e-cigarette companies are using marketing tactics and sweet flavors such as, get this, gummy bear. That's what Jeff said was the number one flavor that they always mentioned, and cotton candy that appeal to kids. I like cotton candy too, man. It's a pretty tasty flavor. But they are going after cigars with this. And that could be a double-edged sword. Dane, you're muted, by the way. I think you are.
I am, you're right.
That could be a double-edged sword because the cigar lobby is pretty strong. And we were talking to a friend of ours a couple weeks ago, and he said that, interestingly enough, some of the largest tobacco consumers in the world, or in the U.S. at least, are concentrated right in that Washington, D.C. area.
Oh, boy.
Because guess what? Those politicians love their cigars.
They
They
do.
really do.
Yeah. And let's not forget to ban flavored wine coolers, anything with sugar in it, bacon, Red Bull, Frappuccinos, and we all forget about responsible parenting. So we just ban things we don't want to put the effort into actually watching what our kids do. Utterly ridiculous.
It takes a village,
I agree 100%, Jerry. I do. I got an idea. Let's ban irresponsible parents.
Yeah.
A thing of the herd might help here.
Try that one. But you know what? I read a statistic, and they talk about vaping in teens, but they forget to acknowledge that teen smoking has dropped 42% since 2011, and now just 9.2%. It's the first time it's now single digits are actually smoking tobacco products, and this is downplayed by the CDC.
Yep.
Of course.
There is a benefit.
Yeah. Oh, it's one of those things that they never want to acknowledge. Oh, well. All right, well, that's it for the show tonight, folks. We will be back in 2 weeks. So see everybody then. Apologize for the delay.
No worries. And big thanks again to Jeff Stier for joining us. Very busy man.
Yes.
We appreciate you taking the time out, sir. And we look forward to all of your new blog posts. And say hi to BB for us, the new vaping mascot.
The vaping mascot.
Ed, got anything else to say?
Nah, I'm good.
We could take you out with the. This is a clip of Nick Green doing a little intro for us.
A bumper, yeah.
The bumper didn't go quite as planned, but here you go. We'll go ahead and play this. If I can get it up here, video clips. There we go. Here's smiling Nick Green.
Hey everybody, this is Grim Green and you're watching another episode of the Plumes of Hazard. Actually, Inside Vaping.
All right, good night, everybody.
Good night, Al.
Good night, guys.
And I think it just locked up actually. So yeah,
Perfect
it did.
timing.
it locked up, and we're still live right now, by the way. But I'm going to go ahead and end task, and that's how we will end this broadcast. Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Inside Vaping. No, I'm just kidding. This is actually just us cutting off the previous episode here.
We're ending the show where it should have ended, but it ended accidentally, and now we're doing it on purpose.
Yes. So, good night, everybody. Let's try this again. Outro. Maybe. Black
Wait
screen.
for it.